What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. In case you are wondering, yes, this is how I woke up today, so no, this isn't a deliberate hairstyle. Now if you remember, when we were looking at cells, we looked at animal cells, plant cells, and we also looked at bacteria cells. Today, however, we are going to look at specialized cells, or different types of cells within organisms. What do I mean by that? Well, when you think about it, you as human beings, you as a kind of animal, for example, don't actually have just one type of cell making up your body. We have all these different parts to our body, and therefore we have different types of cells. Now, the process by which these cells are created, these specialized, all these different kind of cells are made, is called cell differentiation. Now, thankfully, we don't really need to know about the actual mechanics behind this. All we need to know is that there is a process. All we need to know and remember is this terminology called cell differentiation. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some examples of specialized cells that are going to pop up here and there throughout the subject of biology and create our base of knowledge of these cells. So let's go. First, we will look at animal cells. When it comes to the subject of where does life begin, some people might argue it is at the moment when the sperm and the egg fuse together to form an embryo. So we will begin our journey here as well, starting off with the egg cell. Now, the egg cell is the female reproductive cell. The proper term for egg cell is actually ovum. Structurally, it's a very simple looking cell. You have the nucleus, which contains the DNA. You have the cell membrane, which controls what enters or exits the cell. We have the mitochondria that releases energy through respiration. And finally, we have the cytoplasm, the watery part of the cell, which is the site of all chemical reactions and cell activity. Now we move on to the sperm cell. The sperm cells have a tail, but the proper word for it is flagellum. Flagellum allows the sperm to move around and swim to the egg cell. Now, you might remember the term flagellum before. It is the term used for hair-like projections on bacteria cells, which help them move around. As we move up the sperm cell, we come across the midpiece, which contains mitochondria. Now remember, the sperm cell needs energy to move around, so the mitochondria is the site of respiration, and this is where energy is released. You can imagine the sperm cells need quite a bit of energy because they're very, very small, and of course they are in this massive race to see which sperm cell reaches and penetrate the egg cell first. Then we have the head of the sperm cell. Within it we have the nucleus, which contains the DNA or the genetic information. Now the tip of the head contains an organelle called the acrosome. The acrosome contains enzymes which help break down the membrane of the egg cell. That's right, contrary to popular belief, the sperm cell doesn't exactly drill into an egg cell, it penetrates it through enzyme activity. The proper word for sex cells is actually gametes. You're going to notice that while describing the nuclei, I use the term haploid. Haploid means a cell that contains half the genetic information or half the DNA. A cell that contains the normal amount of DNA or genetic information is called a diploid cell. Now, usually when we talk about DNA in this context, we use the term chromosomes. Chromosomes are coiled up strands of DNA. A normal human diploid cell will contain 46 chromosomes, or what we like to call 23 pairs of chromosomes, while our gametes would have 23 chromosomes. Which makes sort of sense because you get half of your chromosomes from your mom and half of your chromosomes from your dad. So when finally the sperm and the eggs fuse together, those 23 chromosomes become 46 or 23 pairs of chromosomes. Next we have the muscle cells. If you look at the diagram of a muscle cell, you might notice that it looks like these long, elongated fibers. And there's a reason for that. As you guys know, through your own movement and exercise, we require our muscles to be able to stretch. At the same time, we also require our muscles to be able to contract, and for the purpose of contractions and the energy that it's needed, the muscle cells contain a lot of mitochondria for respiration. Now, on the topic of muscle cells, there is one thing I would definitely want to mention. If you notice, we have the diagram of a cardiac muscle cell. Cardiac muscle cells are cells that make up the heart. Remember, the heart itself is sort of like a bag of muscles which require a lot of contraction to be able to pump blood around the body. Some of you might already know this. For example, you might have a friend or somebody you know who might have gone to the hospital for a heart issue, and they were then sent to something called the cardiac ward. Similarly, if you're somebody who's interested in exercise, you know that the kind of exercise that actually increases the wellness of the heart is called cardio. Also, while looking at the diagram, I'm quite sure some of you have figured out that the dark circular structures there are the nuclei, and of course the cells have their own cell membranes and cytoplasms as well. The last animal cell we're going to look at is the nerve cell, or the neuron. Now, the job of the neuron is to send electrical signals or electrical impulses around the body. First, we have this strange spider web looking cell body. You can actually see a very prominent nucleus inside of this. Our nervous system is actually quite a complex interconnected system of neurons, which is why the cell body appears almost like a spider web. The dendrites surrounding the cell body receive impulses. The axon gives the impulses a long uninterrupted route to the other end of the neuron. Now, because we are dealing with electrical impulses or charge, just like our wires at home, the neurons also have their own form of insulation. This is the myelin sheath. And finally, we reach the nerve endings, from where the signals can be passed on to other neurons, or structures called effectors. Now, the diagram of the neuron we've used is the more common type of diagram. This is sort of based on the motor neuron. Sometimes you might come across other diagrams of other types of neurons, but if you sort of know how to label that basic image of the nerve cell, then you can sort of figure out many of the different parts that make up other types of neurons. If you ever do a little bit of gardening and you look at the roots, you're going to notice that it seems like they have tiny hairs or fur. These hair-like projections are called root hairs, and we're going to look at root hair cells. Now, if you think back to our lesson on cells, you're probably going to be able to recognize most of the subcellular structures that make up a root hair cell. You have the mitochondria, the vacuole, the cell membrane, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the cell wall. Now, chloroplast is a organelle that is not in this diagram, and I need to have a quick talk about it. Chloroplast is, of course, the site of photosynthesis. It contains a green pigment called chlorophyll, which absorbs the energy from the sun. Now, it makes sense that you don't find chloroplast in root hair cells because ultimately roots are underground and they don't actually need to absorb sunlight. There are plants out there that do have somewhat green looking roots, but generally speaking, root hair cells would not have chloroplasts. Now let's look at some interesting plant tissues that look like they're almost out of some kind of science fiction show. Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at vascular tissues called the xylem and the phloem. Vascular means it's to do with vessels. For example, we have a vascular system where we have arteries and veins and blood capillaries which carry substances around the body. Just like that, the plants also have vascular tissues which carry substances around the plant. Let's start off with the xylem. The xylem is a bit of a hollow tube made of elongated dead cells. The job of the xylem is to transport water and minerals around the body. But the substances only travel in one direction, starting off at the roots because the roots absorb water and minerals from the soil. Then we move on to the phloem. Now the job of the phloem is to transport food around the body, for example carbohydrates that are made in photosynthesis. Unlike the xylem, these substances are actually transported in all directions. The phloem has many subcellular structures such as mitochondria to help facilitate this transport. This is why we do not call them dead cells. Now these were just some examples of specialized cells in animals and plants. There are actually a whole host of cells that we need to know about, but as much as I would like to go through each and every one of them in this one video,
ain't nobody got time for that.
So we'll go through the others as we come across those topics. Please hit that like button, subscribe to School of Roshan, share this video with as many people as you can, and hit that notification icon, and please help a brother out on buymeacoffee.com/insanmusic. Thanks for watching. God bless.